last night my wife was doing a Zoom call for grad school. It was just me and her. Me and my daughter, we'd finish eating. I said, what do you want to do tonight before bedtime? She's like, I just want to play. I said, great. What are we going to play? She's like, I'm going to go upstairs. I'm going to get underpants. We're going to put them on our heads, and we're going to play tag.
Welcome to the Skilled Dad Podcast. This is the podcast for dads of all seasons to learn the things that they can do and engage so that they can go and equip the next generation for success. Here we sit down with everyday dads just like you to learn from their story, get inspired, and then start getting after it. So we invite you to join in, see what you can take away from this story, and apply to your life on your journey to becoming the skilled dad.
All right, guys, I am here with my good friend, Matt Cass, who is one of the most sage men that I've ever met.
And you haven't met a lot of people.
Well, that's true as well. But you're up there. With those that I do know, you're up there, my man. And I've got a little story to tell about Matt as we get started. So Matt and I, 7 years ago, we were just talking about this 7 years ago, when we first met in Denver, Colorado. We were both having our babies at the same time, and we were both looking for resources for dads. And one of the most prominent resources out there didn't quite resonate with some of the things that we would subscribe to. So we had this grand idea that we would start this podcast and website and resource for dads that had a different take, and we called it Baby Daddy CO2 because, you know, we live in Colorado. There's two of us. We're about to be baby daddies, and we're both full of hot air.
Absolutely.
And we didn't do a thing with it except dream about it. So here we are 7 years later. And I want to welcome you to the Skilled Dad.
Thank you.
Which is the place for dads of all seasons to learn the things that they can do and engage in so that they can equip the next generation for success. And I felt like I could not start this without you and I having a conversation first in an homage, which is a big word for, you know, remembrance of, in honor of our 7 years ago. And you're 1.75 babies, and I just had my third, and a lot's happened. So I thought, hey, let's get on and let's do this thing. So thanks for coming on, man.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
All right. So tell us a little bit about yourself outside of the sageness that I shared and a little bit of our backstory. Who is Matt? And hey, guys, real quick on the show, we don't necessarily care what you do. We care who you are. And too often, if you're at a networking thing or you're meeting a new couple or you're talking to some guys, and one of the first things that people ask is, hey, so what do you do? And a lot of reactions. Have you seen that, Matt?
Yeah, I'm guilty of that for sure.
I was guilty of it. And now when I ask it a different way, I get some really interesting looks because it's so non-status quo. But as men in today's society, the identification tie to what we do is so strong. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about with people on this podcast. If you go to skilledad.com and some of the resources there is like, how do we solidify who we are regardless of what we do in a professional environment? Because what we do in the home and other places is going to have so much more of an impact and lasting effect. And jobs are not guaranteed by any means. We've had some discussions around some of that, but you have the opportunity to help create some influence and not quite guarantees, but can make an impact on the future of your kids and your family and your community. So just a quick PSA, but Matt, tell us a little about yourself, bro.
Sure. Yeah. My background, you know, not to go fully on down the actual career path, but I think it really does kind of set a little bit about about how I think about myself now. For 15 years, I was a pastor, worked as a youth pastor for about 10 years, about 5 years working with college kids. And it was really great. And it was really challenging. I'm also really glad to not be doing it as a full-time gig anymore. But it is one of those things that definitely helps you understand that other people will judge you by what you do. And one of the, I think the big lessons and why I like talking about this with you in particular is I think for the first time in my life, when you and I met 7 years ago, when I moved to Denver, Colorado, I met a group of guys who for the first time saw me as Matt and not as that guy who works at our church or that guy who works with my kid or that guy I can't cuss around because he might think something about me or I can't say this joke. Like the whole idea that I was just this cliche of what a pastor was defined me for so many people. And so one of the best things in my life for the last 7 years has been a group of friends who know me for who I am, all my, eccentricities, all my, I'm the guy in our friend group who I do not care about being left out whatsoever. I have no fear of being left out whatsoever. I don't know how many times you called me like, hey, let's go do this. I'm like, nope, see ya, and then I can be that guy, right?
I had fear that you would say no, actually.
But I can be that guy and be fully me, be the kind of introvert, intellectual, into music, into weird things like home brewing and baking bread and all this stuff and biblical scholarship and reading books and all that kind of stuff. And these are kind of my interests, right? But we have this kind of common connection in what we believe, but also just having families that like each other, having kids that are the same age, and all those things. And so when I think about who I am and what defines me, it is most definitely not what I do for 8 hours a day. It's who I am, to my daughter and soon to be, with my son when he's born here in a couple of weeks now, and who I am as a husband. Got my 10-year anniversary to my wife tomorrow, and so these kinds of relationships and how I kind of define myself, really comes into play about, who I am in regards to these relationships, who I am as a father, who I am as a husband, who I am as a friend. And hopefully, over the last several years, I've kind of learned to own that more and to own, that I'm not what I do. And maybe even more so on the flip side of that, maybe I'm better now at what I do because I know more fully who I am.
Yeah, dude, I love that. Doing so well in what we do for 8 hours a day or beyond. For some that might be, my old world, we were just talking about this not long ago too. I traveled every week for 8 years and 12-hour days, 14-hour days, 16-hour days, not out of the realm, and was kind of that weekend dad. And that was some of the motivation to make some different shifts because that's not what we had talked about. But it's important to do well where you are and where you've been placed and use your skill sets. But knowing who you are helps solidify that. I love that. That's good. So, for those that don't know, which is everyone, was it 3 years ago, I guess? Yeah, 3 years ago, sort of 3 years ago, we moved back to Nashville. Yeah. So we, Baby Daddy CO2 was founded 7 years ago in Denver, and now here we are in Nashville. We're doing this one via Zoom. But there's been times where you've called me or I've called you, and just that kind of friendship and bond through shared experiences, through life things that have gone on, and having the community that was built. You are what I would call a 2 a.m. friend. Mm-hmm. Like if you need somebody at 2 a.m. because of whatever reason,
yeah,
who are you going to call?
Absolutely.
And so for anyone that is out there listening to this thing, one of the goals that we have is to help create opportunities and encourage you to go find your people that will be your 2 a.m. friends. Sometimes it's like when things are really good, it's nice to go and kind of boast, or not even boast, but like go and celebrate with people some good things, and you know that you're not going to like get made fun of, or you might get made fun of, but it's, you know, it's the relationship is there. It's all good fun, but that you can celebrate with people, and then on the flip side of that, in the harder times, that you've got people that you can go to and they'll listen to you.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's where some of that sageness comes from that I talk about. So I appreciate that, and appreciate you, you know, for that. So let me ask you this.
Mm-hmm.
You got your baby girl who's not as baby anymore.
No. Yeah.
And you got your son coming.
Yep.
Which is awesome. If we started this thing 7 years ago,
mm-hmm.
like we wanted to, what would you go, if you could time travel back, what would you go tell Matt and Zach sitting at the Starbucks coffee in Allen's Ranch, Colorado?
Yeah.
Some things that they should include and think about because of what you've learned over the last 6.5, 7 years.
So, I mean, there's lots, obviously. And I think the first thing is, you know, if you're maybe expecting, right, your first child, you've never been a dad before, you maybe have some sort of an idea of what that is. You don't really know. And I think for me, one of the things that I've learned over the last bit that I wish I had known sooner, right, is that the importance of being present, right? And this is like I think a cultural buzzword, right? To be mindful and to be mindful of being in the moment. I think that's a really important thing and a really good thing to know as a father. I know of myself, and I mean, and Zach, you know this about me, but just because my personality, I'm a task-driven guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of guys are like that. You know, we tend to be task-driven, or we can be very much that kind of, you know, here's a problem, I'm going to go solve it, I'm going to go fix it, and we're going to move on, right? And that's great, and it helps me get a lot of things accomplished. But I think a lot of times what it means is I'm not completely present to my family, or to very specifically to my daughter. She is, and she's changed a lot since you were last around her, but she is a barrel full of unbridled energy. She has always been that way, but even more so. And we just finished, you know, COVID kindergarten at our house, you know, and kind of me working fully remote from home, her doing kindergarten from home, my wife doing grad school and, you know, part-time jobs from home, and trying to kind of, how do we manage all that? And how do we also manage, like, I need some personal space, and my daughter, who is the extrovert of our family, needs all the attention, right? And doesn't get an outlet because she's not in school, you know, and gets to do play and gets to do all those things. And, you know, but it's one of those things too, that I'm like, I've come to realize she's only 6 once, you know, I'm not going to have that opportunity again. And so rather than being so focused on, I got to get the job done, or I've got to get this task done, you know, I wish I had kind of been able to know, and maybe you just don't know it until you have to kind of experience and go it through yourself. But to be more present with her. You know, last night was actually one of the funnest nights I've had with my daughter in a long while. Like, you know, I know some people are like, oh man, I miss my kid being this age, right? Or, well, they were so cute when they were, you know, 1 and immobile and, you know, couldn't get into everything. And I'm like, the older she gets, the more fun she is, the more her personality comes through, the more the hilarious things she says. Last night, my wife was doing a Zoom call for grad school, It was just me and her. Me and my daughter, we'd finish eating. I said, what do you want to do tonight before bedtime? She's like, I just want to play. I said, great. What are we going to play? She's like, I'm going to go upstairs. I'm going to get underpants. We're going to put them on our heads, and we're going to play tag. And I said, all right. So she went upstairs, got pairs of underpants for both of us from her drawer. We stuck them on our heads. We ran around and played tag in the living room. I have no idea what my wife thought was going on in the middle of the Zoom meeting, as she heard us, screaming downstairs, having a great time. But when else? Obviously, when she's older, she ain't going to do that with me. But
I hope not.
Yeah, I hope not too.
Yeah,
Right? But it's one of those things. It's like,
friend, I will come talk to you if I find out.
Right. It's one of those unique. It's one of those unique, fun, just kid things. Right. It's like I could have just said no, let's not, or let's do something else, or why don't we, or try to redirect. But just you just be you, and whatever that fun, silly idea is that you think is hilarious, let's just roll with it and let's do it. And let me not just be thinking about after this, I got to do bedtime routine. I got to make sure she brushes her teeth and get her milk that she's going to ask about if I don't have it ready for her. And I shut the door, all the tasks that need to be done, and just be present in the silly moment. And, I wish that I had known that, way back when.
I just wrote something down. I don't have the memory of an elephant, so I have to write some things down. But there's a term that I've used for years, and I don't claim this. I heard it from someone else, but it's be where your feet are. And I did that. I mean, this about me. I did that so poorly when I'm still very driven. Yep. But my measurement of success was a different yardstick at the time.
Right.
And it hit me when my 2-year-old son, I guess he was 2 at the time, didn't miss me anymore. And that's actually the thing I was trying to run from, go create this life. Yeah. My parents had divorced when I was younger. My dad wasn't around as much during kind of those central years. So I wasn't going to be that, but in the pursuit of that, I became that. And so that's a huge thing. And my decision was to make a change, divert a career path. And it worked out well for us. Well, at the time I was definitely ill of thinking about it because my day was tied to it. Like we were talking about before, be where your feet are. And, this is a small sidebar, but I'll probably talk about this another time when I actually do the math. So anybody that's listening, come back later or check the website, and we're going to do the math on this. But so much of business, so I've had the opportunity to lead teams of different sizes, big teams, relatively small teams. Data is driving so much of everything. But have you done the math on how much time you have with your kids in 18 years? And that's full 18 years.
Right.
Think about when they're actually moving and cognitive and talking and saying the funny things. And then when they hit, I don't even know, but I've heard 13, 14, it starts to change. So now compress that down to 10 years. Where's the life analytics that help us focus on that? So if you go and do some math, having an underwear on your head, pants party, whatever, those are things that she'll remember and help make that impact. And not being afraid to be where you are and be silly, have some fun.
Absolutely.
So I'm proud of you for that, and I'm glad that you aren't wearing underwear on your head right now.
Yeah, you're welcome.
But thank you. Yeah, that's good. But no, that's a big takeaway. That's a great call out as far as what would you tell yourself 7 years ago? So here's a question. How do you remember that? When you get into the zone, has that actually internalized in you? Or was that a glimpse that you're hey, here's a moment? How do you actually internalize that to help recognize the moments that you shouldn't say, not right now?
I think, it's like everything else in life, right? There's kind of peaks and valleys. and it takes discipline. And I think that's something that's hard to do, especially if you're a driven person. You work 8 to 5, and then, there's this tendency, then I give it my all at work, and then I come home and I'm just drained, right? And so I'm not disciplined in the rest of my life. And so, finding that ability takes, I think for me at least, it has taken a lot of intentionality. It takes that kind of intentionality. It also takes, frankly, for me, listening to my wife, who, as you know, is much smarter than me, and especially about that kind of a thing. And so, she's constantly telling me, like, she's only this age once. I'm trying to help her out. She's also changing career paths, going to grad school right now, trying to get her counseling degree and get her certification and licensure and all that kind of stuff. And I'm just trying to be helpful, saying, hey, should we try and find, a babysitter? You're off work this one day, and maybe you get caught up on this. And would this be a help? She's like, no, I just want to spend time with our daughter that day. And I'm like, that approach to life and that approach to our family, and this is one of the great things about my marriage, is how all those things that I wish I was more like. We have that tendency to probably marry someone who's different than us, and we see those things that I wish I was more of in our partner. And I know that's definitely it for me and my wife. It's just like, that's the attitude I need to have, or that's the focus I want to have for our daughter as well, is to say, she's only this age once. And so we're going to do those things. And I want to be present for her. My dad, I remember my dad, who, I would love to aspire to be like my father. And I remember him, driven guy, was the city manager of the town I grew up in. Talking about a town in West Texas, about 250,000 people, basically, the CEO
of the town, bro. I mean, that's
right. It's a city, right? It's a city. He was a city manager there for 10 years, had worked in the city manager's office for like close to 30, and I remember I was a teenager and giving him grief because he's my dad and that's what we do. And we're wired the same way and think the same way and act the same way. And, I remember giving him grief about like money stuff, right? Like, oh, you'll never buy that for me. You're too cheap, whatever. And I remember him telling me, like, I heard that once. I said, I'm never going to do that again. Right. And it wasn't like I was spoiled. It wasn't like, all of a sudden, like, here's this, Maserati for your 16th birthday or anything like that. But it was just like, it was him saying, like, okay, I'm not going to be that. I'm going to be, who you need me to be. And, his just presence in my life, right. And making time for me and wanting to be like that, for my daughter. I'm sure it's going to go even more so, because I guarantee you my relationship with my son is going to be completely modeled on my dad's relationship with me. And that's a good thing, but to your point, right, we bear that imprint of our own parents, right, whether we want to or not. And even we can be pursuing something to try and make that change, and it's still there, right? So how do I be able to kind of focus in and be aware? And I think that's a lot of it for me too, is it's about being self-aware. And I think so many of us are so busy, we live our lives, working, 8 to 5, and then we're, checking emails on our phones at night, and we're, always kind of on the clock, and we just aren't aware that we're always on the clock. And being able to kind of be mindful of that and be mindful of our time and setting boundaries and doing all those kinds of things, of how I've kind of come to a point where I can be mindful of that, and I can be thinking about that and be aware of, hey, this ultimately doesn't matter. If we go to bed and we miss bedtime by 15 minutes, we're going to do this silly thing because it's fun and it builds our relationship. It builds memories. It'll be something that we talk about
Yeah. But if she doesn't talk about it, I will.
Yeah, for sure. Well, now it's recorded, Once you post it on the internet, it will never go away. So
the 3 people that will listen to this will now know your secret.
Exactly.
That's interesting. So I don't know if I told you this story. My barber always, when I sit down with him, he's an awesome guy, and he always has a question for me. So one day I walked in and I was launching this, and he had his question, and then I said, "I've got a question for you, Dad. What are 3 things that you wish your dad would have taught you?" And I figured it was like how to use a bandsaw or make cornhole boards or something like that. And it was much deeper. So I actually used that question a few times, as awkward as that is. So if I ever see anyone listening, if I ever see you and I ask you an awkward question, at least you can expect it now. I dropped my son off at a birthday party. It was on Saturday, and I didn't have time to do a couple errands. I wanted to drop his baseball gear off. I coached baseball this season and all that, and I didn't have time. So I went and wanted to finish the website that I was building, and this guy sits next to me. And it was one of those moments where, like, I want to ask this guy this question, but I don't, because that's really weird. So I was like, okay, I just feel like I should ask him this question. So I took my headphones off, said, "Hey, how you doing? My name's Zach." And he gave me that side eye, like, "Who the heck are you? Why are you talking to me?" kind of thing. He's nice enough to tell me his name. And I was like, "Oh, I'm bored. Go back to your website." So I put my headphones back in, took them off again, because I got to ask this guy's question. And I said, "Hey, I'm going to be the awkward guy in a coffee shop that asks a question. By all means, tell me to go away and I'll leave you alone." And I think he was curious at this point. And he said, "Okay, what's the question?" I said, "All right, what are 3 things that you wish your dad would have taught you?" And I watched him unfold. And the 3 things that he had were, I wish that he would have taught me how to listen. I wish that he would have taught me how to say no. And I wish that he would have taught me by showing me what it was to really go after something. The reason that came to mind is because you're talking about your dad, and that thing, like, your relationship with your dad was really strong. My relationship with my dad is strong in some elements and not in others. And some of the things that I've actually strived to be are things that I learned that I didn't want. And there might be some guys listening that are like, "Hey, I don't have the same relationship that Matt does with his dad. I want to be different or model it." Some guys may not have dads. There's a fatherless kind of quote unquote epidemic that's happening, and that's not even the ones of dads that are there. That's dads like me that were married but not home and not present.
Yeah.
This group coming together is looking at how we can be the best dads we can be, regardless of your dad's status, and learn from people like Matt that had a great relationship, and take the good and then also recognize the things that we can work on. But you want to learn about a guy, oftentimes ask them about their dad.
Absolutely.
So my turnaround question to anyone listening is, what if someone asked your kids about their dad, what do you want them to say? And that starts right now. That starts with learning from different stories. That starts with taking the ball and running with it and learning as much as you can to make that impact in the short amount of time that you've got. And that includes me and all of us. And we're doing this together. I'm not the skilled dad. I didn't tell you that. I'm not the skilled dad. I have some skills. They're quirky, but it's how we go in this thing together and learn together and take a stand on saying, we're not duds, we're dads. We're leaders of our households, and how we can go and learn and equip each other so we can equip our families. I'm excited for your baby. I know his name, unless he comes out not looking like that name. It's happened to 2 of my kids. I'm just saying. All right, last question for you. For any of those new dads that might be listening to this thing, what are 3 things that you would leave them with that you've learned over the last 6.5 years of being a dad that you would equip them with?
So I think, one I've already said, but it bears repeating: be present for your kids. And that looks different given your situation for sure and whatnot. But for me, like with my daughter and with my son, that means listening, being attentive, being willing to go along with the silliness or maybe something that you don't want to do, being able to be that kind of person that they need you to be, especially out in public, especially with other people, rather than who you want to be and who you want to represent or present yourself to be able to be your authentic self with your kids in any environment, I think is a huge thing that I would encourage any new dad to do. I would say, frankly, work on your marriage. I was told before I became a dad, oh, once you become a parent, it does not solve any. If you had any relationship problems, they do not get solved. They just get exacerbated because you have less time and you're more tired and you have disagreements about things. One of my things as in my background too, so I've done a lot of premarital counseling, and I'm like, couples are not always on the same page about how to raise a kid. And one of the best things that I can encourage you to do to be a better father is to learn how to be a better husband, frankly, or a partner, whatever your situation is that you find yourself in as a father. Being a father means whether you want to be or not, you are always connected to the person that you fathered that child with, whether you want to be or not. So how do you make that relationship work for that kid is important, especially if you're married. How do you maintain your marriage in such a way that it is something that continues to bless your life, but also bless the life of your kid? Be present to your kids, be present to your partner, to your spouse. And I think the third thing, have fun. It sounds simple, but it's not, right? When you are a brand new dad and your child is 5 months old and you're exhausted. I remember still laying on the floor, rocking a bassinet on my back, utterly exhausted because I was the only one who could rock it just the right way to get my daughter to sleep. And I remember in the moment, I'm sure I was miserable. And I'm sure my wife would tell you I was not that fun to be around. And yet now I look back on it close to 7 years later, and I love that memory, right? It's this thing that I did for my baby girl. And it goes with being present in the moment, but it's different. How do you find the joy in those little things? How do you find the joy in helping out by taking your kid to the bathroom at a restaurant when you don't want to do that? How do you find joy when it comes to just the sheer amount of new things that you got to learn? How do I attach a car seat? How do I learn how to get a whole family now ready? It's hard enough for just the two of us to make it anywhere on time. How do I do it with 3, with an infant, and who's going to constantly interrupt and make me tired? But have fun. Enjoy what's going on in your life. The neat thing about that time that you have with your child is you'll never have it back. They are constantly evolving. They are constantly changing. I had conversation with my daughter tonight. I was like, do you remember? She's like, nope. I was like, that was literally like 6 months ago. Nope. I have no recollection of it because she's changing and growing so much. But those kinds of moments that I find joy in, continue to sustain me, especially when things are going to be hard, because they're going to be hard. And so, be positive, find the good, and find the joy in what you're doing, and have fun.
Yeah, I love that. It's when you said the moments, there's a phrase I was trying to think of. We listen to baby monitors all the time. When you got a baby, you got baby monitors. Some might have fancy videos. Some have just the audio, which picks up random radio signals sometimes.
Yep.
But we monitor the baby, and it's funny at nighttime if you don't hear. Sometimes if you're used to certain sounds and you don't hear that sound early stages, you can freak out. You're like, whoa, what's going on? I mean, there's monitors now that actually measure the heartbeat of the baby underneath of where they're sleeping. What came to mind was, in life, in this finite amount of time that you have to make an impact, how do you monitor the moments? How do you pay attention to those moments that pop up that you would not think that taking a kid to the bathroom is going to be something that sticks in your brain forever? But sometimes that's where the funniest stuff happens.
Absolutely.
And it sticks. So being present allows you to monitor the moments so you don't forget it, because you only get that one shot as they progress and become older. And another thing you said, as far as it's going to be hard, there's a quote the other day that popped out, and I loved it. And it was, a smooth sea never made a skillful sailor.
Absolutely.
It's getting the reps in there that help make you refined, and being able to pass it on to somebody else is huge. Dude, I appreciate you taking the time and catching up and launching this 7 years later. And I think you and I will be on here together quite often for however long we do it. But I called you Sage, and that part's, still there. We're not going to publish any video on this because we both have better podcast voices than faces. But I appreciate you taking the time, and how amazing we look back and how much we've learned.
Absolutely.
And how much we're going to learn as we keep going on.
Definitely.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I hope you had some takeaways. I've got 3 primary takeaways for you that I'd love for you to key in on. And if you need to go back and listen to some of this stuff, my challenge to you is, what can you take from someone else's story, whether it's Matt's story, some of my story, or people that you interact with that you can actually take on as your own and say, hey, that's something I can learn, and then focus on to go and learn about it. Doing is actually another way of learning. That's probably the best way of learning. And that's going to help give you the skills that then you can engage and use with other men that you encounter, and then also equip your kids with. But here's 3 takeaways that I had from tonight. Find your band of brothers and your 2 a.m. friends. Put some systems in place that help you be where your feet are. And the third one is, how do you monitor the moments and find joy in the little things that do pass very quickly that might last a long time? Guys, I appreciate you tuning in, listening to the Skilled Dad podcast. We'd love to hear your story. If you want to be on here, you can go to skilleddad.com and put in an application. I'd love to chat with you and learn from you and what you've learned. Matt, again, great to see your face. They can't see it, but they got to hear your lovely voice. And I look forward to doing this again, my friend.
Exactly.